Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Hugh Mayers, and this is Boxing's Psychology. What do I want to speak about this week? I want to talk about the fight at the Tottenham Stadium, White Hart Lane, between Chris Eubanks Jr. and Conor Benn. And I really want to start from the beginning, from the long road it took to get here at this particular juncture that we saw over the weekend in London. There was the background to this fight. If we go back, it goes back actually 30 years, right? It goes back to the rivalries, back to the early 90s when Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr. fought for the WBO middleweight title, and Chris Sr. stopped Nigel Benn in I believe it was the ninth round. And they had a rematch 3 years later at Old Trafford. It was a packed out stadium. It was watched by millions, literally millions, when Celestial TV still used to show, live boxing. And, it really shut the country down. And they fought to a draw. Some people say, most people think, Nigel Benn kind of evened the score and should have got that decision on points. So it was a controversial draw, but a draw nonetheless. That's what the history books will record. And so the rivalry's been stoked. They were supposed to fight a third time, and for whatever reason, it never happened. Even up to maybe 5 years ago, they was talking about them coming out of retirement. I really didn't want to see that. I'm glad it didn't happen. You know what I mean? But yeah, they've been rivals, warm and cold, off and on, sometimes on the lecture circuit together touring. Sometimes it looks like it's a bit prickly in their relationship. But yeah, grown men, right? And the rivalry goes back. And now, so a couple years ago, Eddie Hearn from Matchroom Boxing Promotions or Matchroom Promotions, suggested or was starting to push the idea in the public space about there being a fight between the two of them that could take place. I say the two of them, meaning the two sons, to kind of carry on the rivalry, right, between their fathers. But there was it sounded like a bit of a freak show because Conor Benn was only a welterweight, which is 147 pounds for those who don't follow boxing, and Chris Eubanks was fighting at 160 pounds around that time and had in the past fought at what they call super middleweight, which is 168 pounds, right? So they were just so far apart in size that it just sounded like a bit of a freak show and a bit impossible. But let's say that Eddie Earn really pushed the issue, and obviously Chris Eubank Jr., even according to his cousin Harlem Eubank, said he loves a pound note. So obviously the maths must have added up. They're prize fighters, and Eddie offered him a prize, of a fiscal nature that caught his attention. And so I think contracts were signed. But then there was the infamous um, A and B sample where Conor Benn had failed the drugs test. The Anti-Doping Commission. I can't remember the actual name at the moment, but he was rumbled. He was caught. There was it's no smoke without fire type of talk. He claimed his innocence. The thing went on for years. He did get a silent ban. It's all shrouded in mystery. What was the final decision? But we know that he was out of the ring for 2 years plus before he came back. He had a comeback fight, and so he's had a couple comeback fights at light middleweight, which is a division slightly higher than the one that he originally fought at. I think that's 154, if I'm not mistaken, 153, 154 pounds. So he had a couple light middleweight fights, but he's essentially or was a welterweight coming from the welterweight division. And there was always this kind of suspicion about, when he was on a roll before the drugs test scandal, he started to kind of wipe the floor with a few of his opponents, not long before that drug scandal came out. And since then, he's had fights and performed reasonably well, but he hasn't had the same devastating punch. So there is that suspicion that, you know, yeah, we can read between the lines that maybe he was on the stuff, right? So there is been this road to this fight. You know what I mean? It's been building, it's been building, it's been building. So they've started again, right? Some months ago. late last year, starting to, set the date, saying that he's back on, that he's clear to box, that they've got White Hart Lane, they've got a stadium, they've got a date, they've got a location, they've got a time, everything's on. And yes, there is an argument to say from the boxing purists that, neither are official world champions. Conor Benn hasn't really won any major championship, and Chris Eubanks Jr. did win the IBO, which is a very fringe world title, but some years ago he did win the fringe IBO world title. And he has boxed at a higher level. He's fought former world champions like James Gale. He's fought Billy Joe Saunders, who's a former world champion. He's fought George Groves, Arthur. I can't remember this guy's name, but this guy that fights out of Germany. I'm not sure if he's of Turkish descent, but he Arthur Abrams. He's fought a few, lost some, won some, got knocked out by one of the Smith brothers, Liam Smith, and then came back and stopped him, in a rematch. And Liam Smith was a world champion at light middleweight. So he's mixing out kind of like a higher class. So there is that background to it. And being the bigger guy, so in some respects, he's been seen as a favorite of the fighters to win the competition that would take place on the day in question. And so there's been this build up. Then there was the famous egg slap that went viral because the excuse or the reason for the irregular blood chemical levels that Conor Benn experienced was suggested that it was because he had taken a extremely high amount, was consuming a high proportion of eggs, and so it gave rise to these kind of like irregular, like kind of chemical disproportions in his blood. It wasn't really because of the drugs; it was because of the eggs. So I think Eubanks wanted to troll him. The famous leaning in kind of caught his attention. Watch the ear, watch the ear, and then he comes over the top with a hand. Um, and eggs him in the face, and Conor Benn absolutely goes nuts. Now, what's interesting, if you look at it from a kind of psychological point of view, um, they are real, not double gangers just to say looks, but in sort of spirit and in character and kind of like almost psychological makeup. Nigel Benn, very warrior code, kind of aggressive, straightforward, straight talking, up for a fight anytime, any place. Um, yeah, and even this fighting style is very up for a tear up, less technical, more about heart and aggression and ferocity, like overwhelming his opponents, devastating his opponents with his fast hands and his punching power. Um, and Eubank Sr., very tactical, relies on mind games, trying to use his sweet science, um, quite tough, quite resilient, mentally tough, the mental toughness as well, and the kind of mental tricky side, the master of deception, if you will. And this is really a big part of boxing as well. It's being able to kid the opponent and kid the public and kid the judges, to have influence. And so it's interesting now, both father and son, in terms of the Eubanks, have that kind of aloof attitude and a bit, psyching opponents out mentally, getting under their skin, trolling people, unnerving them. Less about sort of out and out intimidation and pure unbridled aggression. So anyway, we've had this build up to the fight. We've had this build up to the fight. We've had even the Piers Morgan uncensored, where both Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. I say Conor Benn made an appearance, and I say uncensored, but that's actually not accurate. We have to call it censored. Piers Morgan is fake false advertising. He had Jaguar Wright on his show. Side note, right? A singer that made certain accusations and made certain commentaries about Jay-Z and Beyonce, along with other a few other A-listers from the world of music. And I think after Jay-Z's lawyer, legal representatives contacted Piers Morgan, Piers Morgan made official apologies. I don't know. I believe they might have even edited that show if they haven't pulled it down completely. So when you say uncensored, I think after the lawyer spoke to you, it seems after the lawyer spoke to Pierce, it seems like it was censored. So yeah, but getting back to the main point, um, Eubank and Ben Jr. Went on the Piers Morgan to even give their side of the story about the history, the build up, the rivalry, why they don't like each other, who's the real bad guy. It's an interesting plot because usually in stories you have it's usually straightforward. You have the hero and the anti-hero. I think Eubank Sr. was that guy, the way that the persona that he cultivated, it was somewhat reminiscent of a kind of Muhammad Ali archetype, like a smart boxer, bit outspoken, a bit controversial, a bit knowing how to get under people's skin and play mind games and deal with psychological warfare. I think that the real originator of that style is actually Jack Johnson, who played mind games and had all these different tactics to humiliate his opponents. And, while he was beating them up, he would be asking the referee to stop the fight. Or when they throw a flurry of punches at him and they miss, he would give them a patronizing round of applause. So these type of things to get in people's heads and get under their skin. So, you know, Eubanks is from that kind of mold, so he is a perfect villain of the piece. So his son Eubank Jr. being just like him, Chris Eubank Jr. just like him, quite aloof, well spoken, knows how to goad people, how to command press conferences, and just educated guy, smart kid. Um, but that kind of cold and distant attitude doesn't make him like a fan favorite, right? So he's kind of by default, he's an anti-hero, he's a bad guy, he's a villain of the set. But I think Conor Benn would have been kind of like blue collar guy, hardworking, honest. He's not blue collar, he's privileged, right? But meaning he's from the mold of his dad, right? Kind of hardworking, blue collar, straight up, just violence. You come for a good fight, I'll give you a good fight. He's from cut from that cloth, so he would have been a natural good guy, but because of the failed drugs test, I think it got up a lot of people's noses, and so he's a kind of a weird. It was, it's a weird build up of who is really as opposed to who is the hero. It's like who will the real bad guy, will the real bad guy please stand up? So yeah, so as the fight is building, the press conferences, are taking place. There's all this controversy about the weight of the fight. Conor Benn has to come up two weight divisions, and Chris Jr. has to weigh in at 160. So the fight's going to be at 160. Um, and some of you that don't follow the news, Chris Jr. had fallen out with Chris Sr. For a few years, not being in contact, it seems like never seen in public together from all reports. They're not really speaking, they're not on good terms. And his dad was against the fight when it was initially scheduled to be at a lighter weight class, um, of a catch weight of something like 157 pounds, which is under middleweight, and the dad was against it, saying that it's very dangerous for his son to have to lose that amount of weight. And he's going to be in with a tiger, so it's going to be extremely dangerous. Anyway, that fight fell through. They've now signed a fight for 160 pounds, but the dad is still against it, and he's doing the circuit saying things like, I'm against the fight, it's against the rules, it's unethical, it's immoral, it's amoral, it's every other kind of thing. The egg slap is out of order. My son's a disgrace. Connor is swearing. They're bringing the game into disrepute. Every other press conference, Connor is swearing like a beleaguered drunkard. This is not the etiquette of champions and the warrior code of how to present yourself in the public space. So he had his differences. There is, as I said, the is now moved to 160 pounds, but Chris Jr. is in his mid 30s, and so it's all the reports are that it's very difficult for him to get down to that weight. Then on top of that, there's what's known as a rehydration clause, um, where it means they weigh in the day before the fight, I'd say, for example, between 11 and 1 o'clock, and they have to weigh in at 160 pounds, and then in the morning between something like 8 and 9 o'clock, they have to weigh in again, and neither fighter is to be over 170 pounds. They have to be 170 pounds or below 170 pounds. So yeah, Eubank Jr. did come in on Friday for the weigh-in, and he weighed in, I think, a point 0.5 of an ounce overweight. And so he had to go away and try to take off some. So he was sweating and doing all manner of things. They were filming him, and he came back, but he was still, I think, point 0.2 of an ounce. Some I don't know if he could have just. Do you know what I mean? This is something as small as if you went to the toilet and do a wee, right? It could have been that little amount of weight. But anyway, he was fined $500,000, right? $500,000 for being overweight, and there would have been another fine waiting for him if he had not made weight in the morning. But he looked gaunt. He looked very, very drawn. And so at the face-off, you could see Nigel Benn and Conor Benn celebrating almost because they looked at him as if he was a shell of himself. And like, yeah, we've pulled this off because this is me reading into it. But like I say, he looks mash up and he's got a fight tomorrow. How's he going to rehydrate in time to be able to put on any kind of performance? He's going to get creamed. So they were celebrating. Anyway, next day, Eubanks Jr. weighs in. He makes the second day weight, the rehydration clause weight, 169 point whatever, but he's underweight. He's within the weight limit. But this time he weighs in even wearing a tracksuit top. So it means, in other words, he was well inside the limit. So again, so he's throwing back a mind game, like to show that he made it easy. So there's pure mind games going on back and forth as his fight is building, as his fight is building. Um, and then uh we are watching I say we, me and my sons are watching the undercard fights. And then my son shouts out to my oldest son shouts out to me, "Hey Dad, have you seen this? Um, have you seen this?" And I'm like, "Well, what's this? What's this?" He shows me a picture. And then before I know it, when I look around, I see them showing Chris Sr. coming out of a car, and him and his son walking in the stadium together. And Nigel Benn and Conor Benn are watching it on a big screen, and then it pans away as they step into this the studio. As they step into the stadium car park, underground car park, but it's shown on camera. I say they, as in Chris Sr., Chris Jr. The place erupts into pandemonium, and the commentators are going nuts. Um, And the thing about it is that Chris Senior had been saying, "I'm not gonna come to this fight. You won't catch me at this. You're mad." Literally, he said, "You're mad, like, no way am I coming to this fight. It's disgraceful, it's all these different things." But he turned up. I had a kind of feeling that he would be there. But I thought he might come in on incognito, but that was my error. He's a showman at the end of the day, and a showman has to make a show, right? So he stole the show. He came in and the place went nuts. And then obviously there was the amazing ring walks. Um, but the people have been set up, the people have been had, man. Everybody's trying to decode at what point did Chris Jr. patch things up with his dad and know that his dad was coming. Because it seemed until the 11th hour, nobody was the wiser in terms of nobody in the public domain, right, was none the wiser. But they played the dad's song, Simply the Best. He was wearing the same red and white shorts when that same color code that when the two seniors, the two fathers had fought. Funny enough, Conor Benn was wearing black glittery shorts just like his dad when Nigel Benn and Chris Eubanks Sr. had fought the first time way back in 1990. Um, yeah, it was an awesome ring walk, man. It was goose pimples. It was a show. It was a show, a proper, proper show. And you saw um, Eubank Jr., stop when the music was played in, and you saw him kind of like bask in the occasion, as if, he hasn't really fought for no, he hasn't really won a major world title. He hasn't had that big stadium fight where he was the headline, where he was the main attraction. Although he's had big fights and world title fights, but he hasn't had that moment. And you saw him sort of drink it in. And to be fair, reading his body language and his demeanor and how he generally carries himself in the public domain, he's kind of he's a kind of very restrained and a very disciplined presentation, one that really contains their emotions. And he had that aura, like he was built for this. Like he was born for this day. Like he was literally, yeah, this was meant to happen. Like this is written. He had that kind of energy about him. And then when they got in the ring, the fathers embraced. And again, there's a bit more mind games from Chris Senior, even trying to greet Conor and hug him. Like just before he's gonna have a fight with his son, he's trying to play with his mind by being nice, be the nice guy, be the nice guy. There's no friendships. As he Conor sort of pull away and draw away from the hug, and Nigel just sort of gently, guiding Chris away, like, yeah, yeah, what's up, mate? But just pulling him away from his son and stuff like that. And then they got down to they got down to business, and they had a really, really, really entertaining fight, a really, really good fight. Very technical, well, I'd say technical, tactical, not technical. Technique at times, you know, was what it was. Meaning they're not the highest of elite fighters. It wasn't like he was watching, you know, Terence Crawford fighting, I don't know, Sean Porter or Errol Spence or something like that. It was not, you know what I mean? We wasn't watching that. And they never sold themselves as that. They sold themselves as two super athletes that are from athletic stock, and this is part of a legacy and a rivalry. And they got into it on that basis. And yeah, Conor Benn came out steaming, going for throwing those home run looking for the one punch knockout or looking to devastate Chris Eubanks. Um, and Chris Eubank Jr. being quite tactical on the outside and using his jab, and tying up Conor Benn when necessary, close in. And I think the fight went away where I'd say for the first half, um, Junior got the edge of the boxing, but Conor really represented himself. Conor really represented him. He looked busy, he looked dangerous, he looked menacing. He was always pushing the pace. He was always, like pressing it, right? As even though he was a smaller man by a considerable amount once they got in the ring. So that was good. But there was something about Eubanks that, yeah, he just uses height and range. And this is what when you talk about the sweet science of boxing, and I'm not saying it was a technical masterclass, but in the early part, he uses superior skills to his opponent and just used that long jab and touched him downstairs and touched him upstairs, jab to the face, feint, jab to the belly, sometimes sneaking a straight right hand down to the body. But he was doing a lot of good work. The referee was quite strict with Eubanks, giving him quite a lot of warnings, and Conor Benn even put the heel of his glove in Eubanks' foot. He was getting away with a lot. They both were roughing it up, but it seemed like the judge was, well, Eddie Hearn was a big promoter, and Conor Benn's a big was his charge, is his fighter. So it's business, isn't it? So the referee looked a little bit biased from that point of view. The ring was an 18-foot ring, which is a kind of smaller professional ring. Professional rings generally average 20 feet. Sometimes if it's the big boys, if it's the heavyweights, they'll even have like a 22 foot ring. But this was an 18-foot ring on a request from Ben's side, and I figured they might have thought tactically, if they need to close the distance, get closer to rough it up and throw, short shots, that a smaller ring is easier to corner a man in. But funny enough, Chris Eubanks agreed to it. When I heard that he agreed to it, I was thinking to myself, well, he isn't planning on running. He isn't, or we say running, planning on using his legs to evade Ben all night. And so was the case, because for the first half of the fight, it's as if Eubanks was able to use his skills and, nip and get in front. And sometimes Ben was coming on strong and winning rounds. And so, sometimes Ben was in front, sometimes Eubank was in front. But I think he might have, if they were even around the halfway mark, or if Eubank was in front, I think there was a portion of the fight, the second half, where and you could see it that Eubanks was so weight drawn, that Christian was so weight drawn that he weren't moving and fighting like his normal self. He really looked like, yeah, he would look like he was having some major problems in there in terms of his body responding. But I think he had enough experience plus his size that he was able to do what he needed to do in spots, to flurry in spots, to tie Conor Benn up. And when his legs, I say his legs kind of packed up where he couldn't move anymore. And like later on, his dad confirmed it. And when he said that, look, he couldn't even move for the last two rounds, so he just bit his gum shield down and went to have a war with Conor Benn. And he said that was legendary. But it was a stellar performance because I think he weren't just fighting a younger, fresher fighter who's smaller than him, but he was drained out and washed out. And so that's why we're not really surprised to hear that, after the fight that he went to the hospital and I think he's been in hospital for a couple of days while they kind of check his vitals and just rehydrate him and like medical tests to make sure everything's all right. Because to be honest, his old man's right. It's super dangerous to take off that much weight. Plus, he took off a lot of weight late in the game, late in the day, like very close to the fight, right? And then there was a rehydration clause, so he couldn't start eating what he wanted to eat from the night before and sleep and then get up and then eat again. He still had to kind of monitor what his intake until early morning. So yeah, I think that he was a physical shell of himself. Yeah, mid-30s. So athletes are, generally past their prime, unless your name is Bernard Hopkins, who just seems to go on forever. But generally speaking, slow decline from athletic peak. It takes place, depending on genes and whatever the case may be, and people's lifestyle and whatever. But, 32 onwards, it starts to really become a little bit more notable, little bit more notable. And the special ones can keep going to their late 30s, sometimes early 40s, but generally, mid 30s and people start to kind of wind down from their peak. I think um it was a great fight. It was an absolute classic. It was vicious. It was violent. It was dirty. There was malice in there. You know what I mean? There was menace in there. There was machismo, right? There was some mastery, but there was a lot of mind games. But in the end, Chris Eubank Jr. was given a fight by, I think he won it by 4 rounds. It could have been 3 rounds. If you want to really get technical, it might have been a little bit closer, but it was only one winner. Um, Definitely only one winner. And I would say from a fan point of view, if they were to fight again, it would be entertaining. I think it'd be a similar result, but I don't think that Eubanks should fight at 160 anymore because I think it takes too much out of him and it is dangerous. Look, the guy's been in hospital and he was fighting a blown up welterweight and he's been in the hospital for a couple of days. So I think it's really dangerous for him to fight. And if they were to fight again, it should be at a catch weight, like 163, 164, no rehydration clause. And that's not really good for Conor Benn, who's a welterweight. He's putting on too much weight. And if he stays at this weight, he's fighting a 35-year-old guy. That's all right, But if he's going to stay at this weight, there's other middleweights around that if he was to carry on his career at middleweight, they would make mincemeat out of Conor Benn. They'll stretch him out. So, um, for whatever it's worth, just as a fight fan, I would suggest Chris Eubank go on with his career, maybe look for one more or two more money fights at 168. They're talking about Canelo. Whew, I mean, whew. Yeah, Canelo's got a few fights ahead of that, but if he's still around and he's a Canelo, anything like the Canelo that we know now, although they're both close in age, Canelo is a much more accomplished, dangerous, technically savvy, experienced competitor. So that would be a dangerous fight for Chris, but it's a big money fight, so that may be something more realistic for him down the road. If there's any other possible big fight, like maybe like against Callum Smith or something like that. Oh, that's light heavyweight. My bad. Callum Smith has moved up. Yeah. Um, if there's any major honors at 168 pounds, any kind of big fights out there, then that might be a possibility. And Conor Benn should go down to welterweight, take his time and go back down to welterweight if possible, or even at light middleweight and try his luck. But he's definitely not a middleweight. But he has to be careful because when you put on a lot of weight in boxing and fight at a higher weight, it's very difficult to come back down in weight. And particularly for those guys who do it where they've packed on muscle. It's not like some of these bigger guys where they just got a bit of fat and they've gone up a division or something like that. But it's kind of like semi like they're not fully conditioned in condition. Then it's easier to take off the weight, right? If you do it with a nutritionist and you do it in a sensible way. But yeah, you have to be careful about that. Otherwise, you could, really mess up your metabolism and mess up your nervous system, and it's not good for combat sport. But yeah, I think my takeaway for this would be that, um, yeah, looking at the pictures and the imagery, and shout out to man like Ziggy, um, made a comment on Facebook about the importance of fathers. And it really made me reflect when he was talking about the importance of fathers in relation to the boxing match and both dads being there in their sons' corners and that how, children need their fathers, and it's a really important point. Um, a really important point that was made that Eubanks Jr. was big, 35-year-old grown man, but he needed his dad there. And you saw that look when he stepped out of the Land Rover and came around and his dad put his hand on his shoulder and the two of them bopped in the stadium together. The stadium lit up and you could see in his being like there was a different presence about him with him having his father at his side. It's sometimes things aren't just something to do with the social sciences and something that we can qualify and quantify in material terms. Sometimes it's a spiritual thing and it's more than we can always articulate or put in a spoken, but we just know that it's something that's really important. And likewise, after the defeat, Conor Benn took it on the chin, but there's a picture that's quite iconic of him in his father's arms and his dad hugging him and holding him. And although, again, he's a 28-year-old grown man with his own family, but for a moment in his dad's arms, you could see in the inner child, it's like he was a kid and his dad's holding him like, it's my youth still, and it's my lad, isn't it? Like, just comforting him. And yeah, it's kind of powerful image on both fronts. The father and son walking into the auditorium together and father and son in embrace in a difficult moment, saying, you know what I mean, come again, you know what I mean, head up, son, and just kind of like embracing him and letting him know that he matters and he's cared about, And yeah, I think that's a takeaway for me because sometimes in society we sometimes let the importance of fathers can be maybe unrecognized or almost forgotten a little, or on the back burner. But fathers matter. So yeah, like my mate Ziggy made the point on the Facebook post about guys, if you have any little fracture in your life with your children or your ex or whatever it is, and you need to reestablish things with your kids, it's worth the effort. You know what I mean? It's worth the push. Be patient. There's always fracture in life. There's always challenges, but chin up and do the right thing. If you wasn't perfect yesterday, and you probably won't be perfect tomorrow, but you can do better. We can always do better. Whatever it is we're trying to accomplish, we can never be perfect, but we could always do a little bit better. So, do you know what I mean? That's right. As to all the dads in the world, you matter, man, and always do your best for your children, or as best as you can do. But till next time, remember to stay safe. Peace. Hey guys, thanks for watching the podcast. And if you enjoyed it, remember to smash the like button and feel free to leave a comment, to share, and even click on the subscribe button for your free subscription. Till next time.